Welcome back to Stock Explorers. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today we're looking at Longeveron and their cell therapy, Lomecel-B. It's got everyone in biotech talking, especially when it comes to Alzheimer's. Could regenerative medicine be the key?
What's interesting is Longeveron isn't just going after Alzheimer's.
Right, they've got hypoplastic left heart syndrome, HLHS, in infants, and they're even looking at aging-related frailty.
And get this, they're going after all these with one therapy.
That's ambitious, tackling such different conditions with the same treatment. What makes Lomecel-B so versatile?
It's all about the cells they're using, mesenchymal stem cell, or MSCs for short.
MSCs.
They're like little repair crews. They go to damaged areas in the body and help regenerate tissue.
So these little MSCs are rushing in to save the day. Where do they even come from, and how do they end up in Lomecel-B?
They actually come from the bone marrow of young, healthy donors. Longeveron isolates them and packages them into doses of Lomecel-B, and then it's administered intravenously.
So it's not your typical drug synthesizing a chemical compound. This is a living therapy.
Exactly. And a key thing here is that these are allogeneic MSCs, meaning they come from donors, not the patients themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And that's huge for scalability and manufacturing.
Makes sense. But why use someone else's cells? Why not the patient's own?
Well, with donor cells, Longeveron can make a whole bank of cells from just one donor, and then they can use that single source to produce multiple doses of Lomecel-B, much more efficient than harvesting cells from each individual patient.
Yeah, that would be a logistical nightmare. So it's like having an off-the-shelf supply ready to go.
You got it. And because MSCs have low immunogenicity, there's minimal risk of rejection, even though they're from a donor.
Okay, so we've got these incredible MSCs, now packaged as Lomecel-B. Let's zoom in on Alzheimer's for a second. How is Longeveron applying this to such a devastating disease?
Well, they're targeting three key areas: neuroinflammation, vascular health, and tissue repair, all crucial in how Alzheimer's progresses.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. Why focus on those areas specifically?
Alzheimer's is complex, but we know inflammation in the brain is a major culprit.
Right.
MSCs can actually regulate the immune system and tamp down that inflammation.
So they're like peacekeepers, calming things down in the brain.
I like that analogy. And then there's vascular health. Alzheimer's messes with blood flow to the brain.
Starving brain cells of oxygen and nutrients.
Right. And MSCs can actually help grow new blood vessels, improving circulation.
And that brings us to tissue repair.
Exactly. Alzheimer's damages brain cells and tissues. MSCs can release factors that promote regeneration, potentially repairing some of that damage.
This sounds very different from other Alzheimer's treatments, like those anti-amyloid drugs we've been hearing about.
It is a very different approach. Drugs like lecanemab and donanemab target those amyloid plaques, a hallmark of Alzheimer's.
They try to clear them out.
Right, but they come with the risk of side effects, like brain swelling and bleeding.
And how does Lomecel-B compare on the safety front?
That's one of the most encouraging things. Lomecel-B has shown a very good safety profile in trials so far. No major side effects reported.
It's good to hear. So Lomecel-B goes after the disease differently. A&D appears to be safer.
Exactly. And because it works differently, it could benefit a wider range of Alzheimer's patients. The anti-amyloid drugs are very specific to a certain type of Alzheimer's, usually in the earlier stages, but Lomecel-B's broader approach could potentially help patients even in the later stages.
That would be huge.
It could be, but of course more research is needed.
So where is Lomecel-B right now in terms of development and potential approval for Alzheimer's?
They've completed a phase 2A trial called Clear Mind, showed positive results. Lomecel-B slowed cognitive decline and even reduced brain volume loss in patients with mild Alzheimer's.
Wow, that's really promising.
It is, and it caught the attention of the FDA. They've granted Lomecel-B both Fast Track and ARMAT designations.
Those sound important, but I need a refresher on what those designations mean.
Think of them as VIP passes from the FDA. They see the potential of Lomecel-B, especially with the huge need for new Alzheimer's treatments. Fast Track speeds up the development and review process, and ARMAT, which stands for Regenerative Medicine Advanced Therapy, gives even more support and a potentially faster path to approval.
So a faster track to getting this treatment to patients who desperately need it.
Exactly. And Longeveron is expected to meet with the FDA soon to discuss next steps, like what further trials they need or if they can move straight to submitting a BLA, a biologics license application.
Now, what about using Lomecel-B With other Alzheimer's medications, like those anti-amyloid drugs we talked about,
Okay.
they work together,
Researchers are definitely looking into that. They could be complementary since they work in very different ways.
hitting the disease from all sides.
Exactly.
Um,
But of course, clinical trials are needed to confirm if it's safe and effective. But so far, Lomecel-B's good safety profile is encouraging.
Speaking of trials and approvals, let's talk about the business side for a minute. With cell therapies, there's always the question of manufacturing. How do you scale up production, especially if it's approved for multiple conditions?
That's a common concern. But Longeveron has a really smart manufacturing strategy. It all starts with those allogeneic MSCs. One donor can supply enough cells for tons of patients. They're not starting from scratch each time.
Yeah, that single source approach seems like a big deal for production.
It is, and they've really fine-tuned how they isolate and expand those MSCs in the lab, getting a really high yield of cells from each donation, making the most of it.
Smart. So it's not just the donor, but squeezing every bit they can from each donation. What about actually making the doses of Lomecel-B? That's got to be complex, right?
It is high-tech for sure. They have this state-of-the-art facility, GMP compliant. That means good manufacturing practice, make sure the final product is top quality and safe. Plus, they're using cryopreservation.
Cryo what now?
It means they can freeze the doses of Lomecel-B
Oh,
and have them ready to ship whenever, wherever they're needed.
that off-the-shelf thing seems crucial, especially for something like HLHS, where every second counts with those infants.
Absolutely. And it makes it more cost-effective, too.
Ah, right, because of the allogeneic MSCs and the freezing.
Exactly. Keeps costs down compared to other cell therapies that are personalized and way more expensive to produce.
That's a big factor for sure. Got to make sure patients can actually afford it. Let's get back to the science for a sec. We talked about combining Lomecel-B with other Alzheimer's drugs. What's the thinking there?
It's all about synergy, tackling the disease from different angles at the same time. You've got the anti-amyloid drugs focused on clearing those plaques.
Right.
But Lomecel-B takes a broader approach, reining in the inflammation, boosting blood vessel health, and helping with tissue repair, like we talked about.
So it's like a 1-2 punch.
Yeah.
Attacking the plaques, but also supporting overall brain health.
You got it. Now, more research is needed, of course, to see how these therapies actually work together, but the fact that Lomecel-B's got such a good safety track record is promising.
What about using Lomecel-B by itself, no other meds?
Longeveron's looking into that, too. That Clear Mind trial showed some good signs that it could work on its own. But again, more data from bigger, longer studies is needed to really confirm that.
Okay, now let's talk regulations for a minute. Always tricky for biotech. We know Lomecel-B got those Fast Track and ARMAT designations from the FDA. Remind us what those mean and why they matter so much for Longeveron.
Oh, those designations are huge. It means the FDA sees the potential of this therapy, especially for things like Alzheimer's and HLHS, where there's such a desperate need for new treatments. They help speed up the whole development and review process, which is crucial for a smaller company like Longeveron.
Like a helping hand to get through all that red tape.
Exactly. And they'll need all the help they can get.
Which brings us to, well, the elephant in the room. Longeveron's finances. They're facing some challenges, right?
Yeah. Their cash is running low. They need to find more funding pretty soon to keep things going, especially those clinical trials.
That's a big worry. What are their options? And what are the risks investors need to be aware of?
They're exploring different avenues like partnerships, grants, maybe issuing more stock. But each of those comes with its own risks.
Like what? What's the worst that could happen?
The biggest fear is bankruptcy. If they can't get the money they need in time, they might have to shut down completely.
And that would just be awful. Not just for the company and investors, but for the patients counting on their work.
Totally. And even if they dodge bankruptcy, there's still the risk of share dilution if they have to issue more stock.
Share dilution, right? Explain that again for listeners who might not remember.
It's basically when a company makes more shares, it can make the existing shares worth less. Think of it like a cake cut into slices. You own one. If they suddenly cut more slices, your slice is a smaller piece of the cake.
So your ownership in the company shrinks.
Exactly. And that can hit your returns on investment.
It's a balancing act then. They need the money to stay afloat and bring this potentially life-changing treatment to market, but they also need to protect their investors.
That's the struggle for any biotech company, especially one working in such a complex and expensive field as regenerative medicine.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've covered so much, from the science behind Lomecel-B to the manufacturing hurdles, the FDA, and even the financial side of things. In Part 3, we'll tackle those big questions about Longeveron's future. weighing the potential rewards for investors against those very real risks. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, Stock Explorers. We've been on quite a journey with Longeveron and their Lomecel-B. We've covered the science, the manufacturing, the FDA, the financials. Now, the big question, what's next for Longeveron? Is it a good bet for investors?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And with Longeveron, it's a tough one. Huge potential, but some big challenges too.
Let's start with the potential. What could really push Longeveron forward in the coming months, years, etc.?
Well, that upcoming meeting with the FDA about Lomecel-B for Alzheimer's is a big one. Getting some clear guidance on how to get to a BLA, that would be a major win. Could really boost investor confidence.
So a green light from the FDA would be huge.
Yeah.
What about their other projects? Like the HLHS treatment, that one seems further along.
Oh, absolutely. Their phase 2B trial for HLHS is almost done. They're hoping to submit a BLA for that by 2026.
Okay.
If that trial goes well and they get FDA approval, that would be their first product on the market.
That would be massive, not just for revenue, but to prove their whole platform works.
Exactly. And it gives them experience with the whole regulatory process.
Right, makes them less risky in the eyes of investors. And could attract bigger pharma companies looking to partner up.
Partnerships, yeah, that's another big possibility. Could be good for both sides.
How so?
Well, Longeveron gets more resources and expertise, and the bigger company gets into the regenerative medicine game, which is really heating up right now.
Partnerships can be tricky, though. What should investors watch out for to make sure it's a good deal for Longeveron?
Good point. It's got to be the right deal, not just any deal. Investors need to look closely at the terms, make sure Longeveron keeps enough control of their tech and gets a fair share of the profits.
It's easy to get excited about a partnership, but got to look at the fine print. Now, let's face it, Longeveron's finances are a bit of a mess. How bad is it, really? What could happen?
It's a real concern. Their cash will probably only last until late 2025. If they can't find more funding, they'll have some tough decisions to make.
Like bankruptcy.
That's the worst case scenario, but it's on the table. If they run out of money and can't raise more, that's it. Game over.
That would be terrible for the company, the investors, and especially the patients who are hoping for these treatments.
Absolutely. Even if they avoid bankruptcy, they might have to issue more stock to get the cash they need. And that brings the risk of share dilution, which we talked about earlier.
Right.
It can really hurt the value of those existing shares.
It's a tough spot. They need money to keep the lights on and move their research forward, but getting that money could cost current shareholders. So how should investors weigh the risks and potential rewards with Longeveron?
Biotech is always risky, but it can pay off big time.
High risk, high reward.
Exactly. With Longeveron, it depends how much risk you can stomach and what your timeline is. If you're okay with high risk, high reward, and you're in it for the long haul, Longeveron could be interesting.
But it's not for the casual investor.
Definitely not. Investors need to do their homework, understand the science, look closely at those clinical trial results, and keep a very close eye on their finances and how they plan to get the funding they need.
It's complicated, but a story worth following for sure. Regenerative medicine is the future, and Longeveron's right there on the leading edge with Lomecel-B.
Agreed. Their approach, going after multiple diseases with one therapy, is pretty unique. Could be huge if it works out.
Well, Stock Explorers, that's a wrap on our deep dive into Longeveron. We hope you found it useful as you explore the world of biotech.
Remember, always do your own research and talk to a financial advisor before investing in anything.
And don't forget to subscribe to Stock Explorers, like this episode, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future deep dives. We're uncovering the most fascinating stories in biotech and beyond. Thanks for listening.